One of the worst arguments made to discredit me and my opinions is, you hate everything Disney Star Wars because George Lucas didn't make it. Typically, these people have never watched my channel extensively because that statement is factually incorrect. In a recent poll, I asked if Andor had to directly compete with all the classic novels like Darth Bane, Republic, Legacy, or Shadows of the Empire, would it be as overblown as it is? A majority of people said no, but there was a stubborn quarter of people who said yes. One comment that stuck out to me that inspired this whole rebuttal was,
"Speaking as someone who hated the sequel trilogy, Andor is genuinely one of the best TV shows to come out in the last 10 years. Not that you would know. You were determined to hate this show before it even came out by the simple fact that it isn't made by Lucas. I guarantee all of you, if Lucas did make a sequel trilogy, which also would have ignored the EU, JJ the ass clown would suddenly hate the latter with as much vengeance as he hates the Disney stuff."
I watched this show after all the overhyped praise came out, expecting something that passed the quality baseline. And it was a fucking slog to get through. It was a goddamn nightmare, and wouldn't wish that experience on my worst enemy. But let's dissect what this guy says anyways.
"Andor is genuinely one of the best TV shows to come out in the last 10 years.
Yeah, well, from what I've gathered, television in the last 10 years has been really lacking. So Andor being the best doesn't say much. I have to wonder if there's some superficial reason Andor is propped up so much, because of how doubtful it is that Tony Gilroy actually managed to get past Kathleen Kennedy's destructive influence. Also, I have this to say. Television in general is overrated. I've started to get the impression that the best stories are found in novels and comic books, not movies and television. They just can't compare. Especially not anymore in the age we live in of corporatized franchises that are soulless compared to the source material. I think at this rate, the best television show cannot compare to the best novel or comic, and this applies to Star Wars too. People think Andor is the best, and most of these people have never read a single EU story. In fact, they're so stubborn that they think Andor is the best it'll ever get and shut off everything else. That's part of why I don't like Andor. It's got the worst fan base ever. Anyways, let's continue.
"You were determined to hate this show before it even came out by the simple fact that it isn't made by Lucas."
You know, I don't like absolutely everything George Lucas made. I wasn't that big a fan of THX 1138, his directorial debut. I thought American Graffiti was a vast improvement actually, and Star Wars was certainly the shit. Also, you are kidding me, right? I didn't know George Lucas wrote the entire expanded universe single-handedly. That's quite a record for the amount of stories written by one author. The guy invalidates his whole point by using the whole,
"If Lucas did make a sequel trilogy, which also would have ignored the EU, JJ the ass clown would suddenly hate the latter with as much vengeance as he hates the Disney stuff."
Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe fuck yourself.
That's just a hypothetical what if. People seem to think that I'm just some hardline expanded universe purist who can't accept something that's not part of that overarching story. This is blatantly incorrect though. I know that the whole expanded universe as we know it wasn't 100% consistent with itself. It was a decent attempt, but it wasn't. The OG Marvel comics were mostly retconned by the time Heir to the Empire came out, but here's the thing. If people actually bothered to analyze my criticisms about something like the Clone Wars, they'd understand that it isn't just the retcons by themselves of the fact that they changed the story. No. If people understood what I hate so much about the Clone Wars and Disney Star Wars in general, it's typically backtracking and changing the themes and symbolism in a way that makes the story worse. It's not just that the Clone Wars 2008 is inferior to the multimedia project in terms of storytelling quality. It's that the new story radically changes the prior material for the worse. I don't know about you, but the short-sighted attempt to fix Anakin Skywalker's character by shifting his arc made the story worse, and Ahsoka especially relies on a whole stretch of the story to exist. It was kind of too late to give Anakin an apprentice during the Clone Wars based on how the movies were written. And Ahsoka existing doesn't make the story better, it makes it worse. I value the overarching story of Star Wars far less if Ahsoka is in the picture. I'm actually kind of sick of people simplifying my point to me being big mad that Quinlan Vos was changed to Quinlan Lebowski, abandoning his characterization in Star Wars Republic. And yes, it is part of the problem. But the more practical problem is that Quinlan Lebowski makes for an inferior story, from both an enjoyment and thematic standpoint. This might take me a few hours to explain properly, but it's clear that these people won't even watch a video that long anyways, so I'm not gonna bother here. I feel like I've also gotten off track, but the idea that I just shill for George Lucas is wrong, and the idea that I just shill for the expanded universe is also wrong. I actually understand, unlike most people, that the expanded universe was not set in stone, and it retconned itself a lot. But I'd hardly say that the retcon shattered the story until the Clone Wars 2008. And when you get into Disney Star Wars, rarely do they ever respect the story of Star Wars. They don't even try. The sequel trilogy is framed as episodes 7, 8, and 9, but all they do is undermine and ignore the story that George Lucas made. The Filoni-verse mostly is just an attempt to turn Star Wars into the Ahsoka Tano story, a character that already broke Star Wars and Anakin Skywalker's arc, and Andor is a complete abandonment of Star Wars, made by a guy who doesn't even like Star Wars. I don't know about you, but I much preferred Star Wars when it respected the OG source material. A New Hope is Star Wars in its purest form, and so all future stories will be based on that, with the underlying question, does it respect the original? And for the most part, I see no value in any of the three examples I just listed. In fact, I think they undermine the source material a whole lot, and add nothing of value. Or it comes off as a selfish writer using the source material to preach their own ideas that are incompatible with the original. And the thing is, you can be separate without breaking the original. Republic Commando is a squad-based first-person shooter that is mostly about brotherhood in the military. But that doesn't fuck over A New Hope. It's just the game developers trying something new. I cannot say the same for Andor. I'd have to make its own video for each example I used, but this EU purist narrative is just not true. In fact, I'd like to go over prominent fanfictions in the future that isn't George Lucas or the expanded universe or Disney. One example being Brotherhood of Shadow Solomon's Revenge, a KOTOR expansion mod that came out back in 2009. On top of that, I'd also like to look at fan films and fan stories, and so on. I mean, you guys did see me critique Belated Media's terrible prequel rewrite. I should probably get to it sooner rather than later, but you get the point, and I will try to judge these stories based on the same basis I judge everything else Star Wars. So in short, you're wrong. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes? Under the mountain.